Okay. Hmm.
Sounds like we're live now.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is John Boquette. I'm here at the Newtown Bee. I'm associate editor of the Newtown Bee, and this is the third in our series of diversity discussions. Today, we are going to be talking about housing, and I'd like to welcome our panel, First Selectman Dan Rosenthal, Fair Housing Officer Kimberly Chiappetta, who also spends a lot more of her time assisting the Economic and Community Development Office in the Fairfield Hills Authority. We've got Attorney and Planning and Zoning Chairman Don Mitchell with us, as well as Land Use Director George Benson, who I learned today also serves on the Home Connecticut Steering Committee of the Partnership for Strong Communities, which is engaged in affordable housing challenges and initiatives. So we'll be hearing some perspective from all of these guests. So according to a 2013 report from the Connecticut Fair Housing Center, zoning is often used to keep people of color out of communities, sadly, and Connecticut still includes some of the most severe restrictive local zoning laws in the nation. But as you're going to hear, things are a little bit different here in Newtown. At the time of that report, about 96% of Connecticut towns had no provisions for affordable, or as George has coached me, workforce housing in their municipal zoning ordinances, and more than 24 towns didn't even permit the building of multifamily housing, which is really one of the most cost-effective ways the report says creates affordable workforce housing. So we're going to talk about a lot of that today. It's interesting because by 2020, the study projected that nearly 1 in 3 of Connecticut's working age population will be people of color. And that studies show that anti-density zoning, which calls for large lot sizes for houses, has limited the supply of housing. It's increased housing prices and reduced the local supply of multifamily units. So I'd like to just start off with Dan. Dan, if you could just give us a quick review of the racial and ethnic demographics here in Newtown, and introduce to our viewers the differences between fair housing and affordable housing.
Sure, John, thank you. And my thanks to you and the Bee for hosting this again. And of course, Don, George, and Kim for being a part of this. I had the good fortune of being on the initial one with the police commission and the chief, and then the last one that we held with members of the Board of Education and our superintendent. I think all were good, initial conversations. And I think, really the point of this is just to try to connect the community to our local government and some of our local government staff, and sort of get a sense for how we're thinking about some of these things. Look, I think from a demographic standpoint, certainly Newtown is, predominantly a white community. As someone who grew up in Newtown, I would say as a young person in school, what I think the community lacked from a racial diversity standpoint, we certainly had a robust economic diversity in our community. We had folks from all walks of life, small homes, large homes. There was a lot of socioeconomic diversity here. I think that we still have some of that. I think it changed a little bit just in some of the building boom that took place, during the 80s through the 90s and into the housing peak in the early or to mid 2000s. So I think things gentrified a little bit. I think it is fair to say there is and this is what we want to dispel, some of the misconceptions around some zoning and some of what our community has to offer, because we do offer, I think, a fair amount of diversity in our housing base as it is. I think it is something that we can certainly look to improve, and we always want to make sure that our community is welcoming as it possibly can be. But I think we have been forward thinking and forward looking as it pertains to housing. I think that you'll hear that when you have a chance to listen to Don and George and Kim. To the point on just the distinction between fair housing, which Kim covers as part of her duties. The fair housing came out of the Fair Housing Act from the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which was an expansion of the Civil Rights Act from '64. And really, what that does is it protects people from discrimination from when they're renting, buying a home, getting a mortgage, seeking housing assistance, or engaging in other housing-related activities. It prohibits discrimination based on race, color, nationality, religion, sex, family status, or disability. So that's fair housing. Not too much on Kim's shoulders. And then affordable housing, and again, it's referred to as many things. Workforce housing, as George said, but affordable housing is understood as housing that costs a household not more than 30% of its income. It can be either rental or home ownership, and it varies based on the income of the household and the local median income. So again, this happens to be Fairfield County is a fairly expensive place to live. So the area median income may differ, and certainly the correlating housing price is going to differ based on part of the state, part of the country. So it's definitely not a fixed number, across the universe.
Yeah, and that language is inherent in the statute too, right?
Correct. How does it work? Rental or sale prices, and we can get into some of the distinctions here. We have our own local incentive housing zone, which is different from the state 830G standard. But basically, rental or sale prices are based upon either 80% or 60% of the area median income. The area median income is published by Housing and Urban Development, which is a federal agency. In Newtown's case, we fall under the Danbury area median income, and that AMI is currently $122,000 a year. That's just a little bit on the distinction between fair housing and affordable. Now we can get into some of the local particulars.
Yeah, let's bring Kimberly into the conversation with the caveat that folks, Kimberly set up with a camera on one computer and an audio device separately, so you'll see her, but when she speaks, you'll see an icon.
This is their ploy for the next budget cycle. So
finally getting that laptop microphone.
Yeah,
yes. So Kimberly, nearly every housing program in Connecticut is under a federal or state obligation to affirmatively further fair housing. So how does your office work to ensure Newtown is in conformity or even maybe exceeding state and federal housing guidelines?
In regards to fair housing, we recognize it annually, so we reach out to banks and realtors asking them that they recognize it along with us. I'm always available here, so I apologize, but there's somewhat of a distinction between the affordability and the fair housing, as Dan mentioned. So in regards to when I put on my fair housing officer hat, it's the recognition of it. I'm here in case someone wants to register a complaint. I am also here if anyone has any questions. I can direct them to the right assistance they need, but that's my portion. Really, most of our planning goes along with the affordable housing piece. Mm-hmm. So when I handle affordable housing, that goes along with I keep track of the affordable housing that's available in town, and that's reported annually in the state's appeals, reported back to them. I've also created templates based upon the deeds, so we have them available. If there's a tax assessment question, I can assist with that. And of course, I'm always here if anyone has any questions on their affordable unit.
So who comes to you to seek your counsel or your services as in your kind of fractional capacity as a fair housing officer?
It's been very quiet. I've worked for the town for 3 years now, and I've only had one person contact me with questions. So I was able to get her some information. The person didn't want to register a complaint. They seemed content with their answer, and that was about it. So otherwise, I'm not even aware of any records. So I would like to think that there isn't a problem in our town, that we're a loving and welcome town.
Yeah, I was going to say that leads me to believe that also the fact that there's been no issues at the state or federal level in terms of intervention, you're also doing a great job in ensuring the town's conformity to the extent that you have to handle that responsibility. That's great. So I wanted to now move into an issue with Don Mitchell in regards to anti-density zoning. We mentioned this a little bit in the intro, that anti-density zoning calls for large lot sizes for houses, and it limits the supply of housing and reduces the local supply of multifamily opportunities. So Don, where does Newtown stand today? And George, I'm sure you could weigh in on this as well. Where does Newtown stand today in terms of its zoning practices in relation to anti-density zoning versus inclusionary zoning for residential developments? And are we currently in the process of, or have we done anything to enhance that in recent years?
In recent years, yes, there's been, I think, real progress toward multifamily. We have recently approved 210 apartment units in Hawleyville that are the town's definition of affordable. Apartments are becoming more common in town. They were restricted previously, but we've seen a couple of projects that have come and been approved, and I think people are getting used to it. There may be more changes coming, I don't know, concerning in-law apartments. There are periodically bills put up to the state legislature to increase the state's push toward affordable housing. And it started in 64 with the federal government, and they put some money behind it. The state government, in turn, pushed the towns. The towns didn't do much in the early years, and so the state created this 830G, this affordable housing statute that was a real hammer over towns. There have been ongoing efforts to try to fit 830G and that tool into towns of various sizes. It's a one-size-fits-all. It's pretty good for some towns and cities. I'm not so sure it's so good with a town our size and with our current density. But I mean, there is an anti-density feeling out there. But if you look at our history, the history of Newtown even, density has always increased, except, when was it, around the First World War, when all the guys went off to fight. Other than that, we have consistently increased our density. And we're going to continue to increase it, but we really are struggling with the infrastructure. We increase the density, we need more roads. We've already got a problem with our roads and traffic. So you're really looking now at mass transit, which you can't get until you've got the density. You can't get the density without the mass transit.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about the history of Newtown, what we've gone through.
Yeah, George.
Recently, we started out with 15 years ago, we had a multi-family regulation, affordable housing regulation that was allowed 3 units per acre, which is not a dense development at all. And because of that, none of the developers were really using that to build because it wasn't financially feasible to do that type of a development. So all we had in Newtown basically was 55 and older apartments that were allowed in town. We didn't even allow market rate apartments in town at that point, let alone affordable housing at that back then. Over the years, we've progressed. We've done, as Dan said, we introduced the incentive housing zone, which allows 12 units per acre. The state incentive housing zone allowed 20 units per acre minimum, which we felt was too dense for Newtown. And also the 830G proposal that the state has allows for many units per acre. There's really no limit on the units per acre, only the sewage and the water and that type of infrastructure. But we felt that the 830G went a little bit too far, and the state did too. They came up with the incentive housing zone statute that we modeled our incentive housing zone after, but we took their statute, modified it for Newtown, which we would hope people would be able to do for the 830G, like Don mentioned, because it doesn't always fit every town. So we really have progressed over the years, and we're getting better and better. As you said, I'm on the committee in Hartford to promote affordable housing, but affordable housing in a way that works for each individual town and their circumstance. For instance, we need water and sewer, as Don said. We do need area to develop because it needs square footage of acreage to be able to build a development of a certain size. So actually Newtown has areas, and we did do an incentive housing zone study 10 years ago that highlighted the areas that are available, would be available, or could be available for development. So we have been working over the years trying to develop programs and working on getting more affordable housing into Newtown to improve the density thing and the diversity of Newtown.
Also, would somebody else want to?
Yeah, I was just going to quickly jump in. I don't mean to derail things on the 830G piece, just to say sort of functionally, my perspective on that. So 830G basically, for folks that are watching, if the town rejects a development proposal, developers can then sue us under, in state court under that 830G statute. So it basically pulls it out of local zoning authority and puts it into the state courts. In my opinion, 830G has not served the state very well. I mean, I think it's been, and no offense to lawyers, Don, I think 830G has been good for the legal community, but the reality is it hasn't done a lot to, I think, make community, bring a more diverse housing base to communities, because the reality is usually how these developments start is they start as a developer coming in, because again, the economics are more lucrative in luxury multifamily housing. So usually what happens is a developer will approach the town, the land use office, P&Z, and they'll say, we want to build 50 units of luxury housing. And it's in an area where, we don't feel that that's consistent with the character of the town. It doesn't work based on the number of issues. We don't have, the area isn't zoned for that per se. So the club that they'll use is they'll say, well, if you don't give it to us, then we're going to sue you under the 830G statute. You'll lose, and we'll give you 300 units. So it winds up being, this whole, the real ask, the initial ask is always that luxury housing, because that's where the economics are. Because in an 830G application, just so that people understand the finances behind it, 30% of the development, because 30% under 830G has to be affordable, the developers assign zero value to 30% of the units. So they pack all the development costs, the legal costs, and everything else into the other 70%. So as a result, they have to build a lot of density in order to make it economically viable for them. So 830G, I think, really has not helped, I think, communities diversify their housing base because it's such an extreme. I don't think that the challenge in Newtown has been to say, you know, we're trying to keep out a certain segment of the population, of the, demographically speaking, economically speaking, racially speaking. It's just, you know, to wedge 500 units on a 20-acre piece of land is just extraordinary, and you know, alters the look of the community. So
Well,
so I don't want to go, I just want to give people a little bit of background. And the challenge is, you know, 8/10 of our by deed restriction, 8/10 of our housing base, 8/10% of our housing base is deed restricted affordable. The state wants us to be at 10%. Every time we build the development, you're adding to your numerator and your denominator. So it's a goal that you're chasing to get to the 10% state guideline is very difficult. But if you look at it in other ways, you know, our housing base is very diverse.
yeah. Well, all that being said, how has 830G been applied in situations in Newtown? Is there an illustration of 830G either being used successfully or asserted and defeated?
Well, there's one case that I think George can speak to. It was actually on Church Road. So it's a Adona Commons, right?
Yeah,
Right
Donut
Well, what happened, George?
just above Figs. I think the original proposal in that was for 12 units. But this predated any of our, you know, we didn't have zoning at the time that was permissive of that, correct, George?
They want to do more dense of a, more density than we allowed in our current, like I said, our current regulations at the time were only 3 units per acre. They wanted to go up to, I believe, 5 or 6 units per acre. And when we said no, they went, they applied for the 830G application, and that allows them to basically write their own zoning regulation for their development, which was, I believe, for 6 units per acre. We fought them in court, I believe, for at least, I want to say 4 or 5 years, and we ended up losing the case in the end. It's very difficult to win a case against 830G unless you have an environmental reason or a health reason, like the septic or the sewer areas aren't compatible with the development. And we didn't, so it's very difficult to fight an 830G. That's why we wanted to go to the incentive housing zone route to give a developer a different choice, which was 20% affordable units and at 12 units per acre instead of 20 or 30 units per acre, which some of them want. So we have basically, the people that have come in recently have used the incentive housing zone regulation instead of going for the 830G regulation, which they could do. But we've crafted the incentive housing zone regulation to be financially feasible for the developer and compatible with the town of Newtown, I think, with our 12 units per acre density.
Okay. Well, also, you did mention, and so is Dan, and I think Don as well, since we logged on here, issues having to do with water and sewer availability and infrastructure. Can we talk a little bit more about how water and sewer infrastructure and access to it are also, it's also a significant factor in where and what can be developed in terms of multifamily, right?
Yeah, we have only certain areas of town have water and sewer, around the borough, around exit 10 and exit 9. From Bethel, we have sewer coming in, Danbury. And those are the areas that can be developed at this point. They usually by state highways, obviously, with water and sewer. And a small percentage of the town is serviced by sewer and water. So it does limit the areas we can do. We can have affordable housing, multifamily housing. And also, again, you need the acreage. And those areas of the town that have sewer and water have been developed over the years. So there's very few areas that really still are available in Newtown to do this type of development.
Okay. So I'll put this out to anyone who wants to address it. In doing some research a little bit earlier, I found a number of studies showing that affordable or workforce housing has no negative impact on surrounding property values, and in fact can enhance nearby property values. There's no evidence that affordable or workforce housing brings crime. Diverse communities can reduce prejudice and promote tolerance through it. And typically the tax rate for multi-family complexes is higher than the rate for single family homes. So is there a not in my backyard kind of factor that comes into play uh, when it comes to developing more diverse and affordable housing in Newtown? Or does it really come down to the way that just Newtown is topographically, geographically, and with its infrastructure?
I think everything you said was true, but people have to be educated to that fact that it doesn't destroy your property values, doesn't do a lot of negative things to the town. And that's where we run into a lot of problems because people don't either believe it or don't know it or don't understand it. And that's where and back to the taxes, I mean, some of these developments will end up paying more taxes than a commercial development because of the amount of apartments in that area.
Mm-hmm.
So there are positive reasons for it. It's just a matter of getting the message out to people and educating people, I think.
Yeah,
So,
I think
yeah.
there's, sorry to jump in. I mean, I think there's a NIMBY factor in just about every proposed development that the town may get. I mean, I happen to serve on P&Z for a term as an alternate back in the 90s, just when the housing boom was starting. We had meetings that went to 1, 2 in the morning, and the town was getting a lot of single family residential applications, where we were seeing farms converted into single family housing developments. And that was obviously a very contentious time in town. There were a lot of people that were upset about that, and it really had nothing to do with the who might move in. I think it had everything to do with just feeling like the look and the charm of the town was changing. And I think that, when we've seen some of these multifamily applications come in, can I get into everybody's heart and mind? Absolutely not. But most of what I see in those circumstances are people that are concerned about the size and scope of something rather than who might move in. Are there maybe some people that are against it for that reason? Probably. But I think the prevailing theme is always, it ends up being something that is just so substantial relative to what's there that it just becomes a bridge too far for people.
And we've got a diverse community in terms of where our residents come from to live in Newtown. But don't you think a lot of it is kind of historically rooted in the fact that early on, affordable housing was getting wedged into areas that already had property value issues, crime issues? Isn't the the prejudice, if you will, against affordable housing rooted in developments and concepts that are now decades old?
There's
I
a
think it goes
broad,
back. Go ahead, Don. Sorry.
there's a broad sentiment in town against change, against the unknown. And that sentiment gets stronger as a proposed development approaches your house. And that's the NIMBY factor. It's the unknown. There are a lot of myths out there that, as you mentioned, that are without foundation, that it's going to be disastrous for a town or a neighborhood. On occasion, it's the wrong project in the wrong space. I think Newtown has a pretty good handle on appropriate projects for those spaces.
Another thing that George mentioned prior to us going live was that Newtown has a lot of affordable housing that's not included in that state goal of 10%, right?
Yes,
Let's talk a little bit about what is available for people here, even though it doesn't kind of fit into that missing puzzle piece of what the state is setting as a guideline.
well, that's the problem. The state guidelines are very strict, and any low-income housing has to be deed restricted, so it can't be sold for a certain amount of profit over a certain number of years. So people are hesitant to deed restrict their property, which includes apartments in homes, which includes the trailer parks in town. We have many smaller homes that are below the affordable housing, price range that aren't included because they're not deed restricted. So I think that the policy of the state by, the strict policy really limits the really accurate assessment of a town's affordable housing stock. It makes it sound like we don't have any affordable housing in town. We do. It's just not to the state standard of being deed restricted, which makes a big difference. If you go by when people see the number of our affordable housing so low, they think we all have, 3-acre lots with, huge houses on it. We do have those, but we do have smaller homes. We have apartments, we have trailer parks. We have other opportunities for people that are not, again, in the state criteria.
Which, save for deed restriction, would fall under the qualification.
Yes, they would. Yes, they would.
So George, is the Partnership for Strong Communities either working independently or in concert with other groups to try to lobby any kind of changes in that standard at the state level?
Yeah, I've testified in front of the Senate subcommittees on it. I think, again, Dan mentioned it, that it really doesn't fit, or Don, it doesn't fit one. Each town is different, or each categories of towns are different. Something that works for Hartford doesn't work for Newtown. Something that works for Litchfield doesn't work for Newtown. There's all different criteria, all different situations in towns where they really have to form some type of a statute that really can be more flexible with each town's certain circumstance, because we are different. And the other issue is a lot of people are looking towards, our regional planners are looking at regional planning for affordable housing. Right now, we're judged individually by each separate town, where a lot of people feel we should be evaluated by the Danbury area and like the Waterbury area and Bridgeport area type of an evaluation. It's tough right now. It's each individual town has that mandate of 10% independent of any other town. And it just doesn't, it was meant well to begin with. I know the guy who wrote it, 830G. It was really meant well, but it's just, the application of it just isn't working for across all different towns in the state.
Right. Well, as we hit about the 30-minute mark, we've covered a ton of ground, but something that nobody has mentioned yet, and I don't even know if it's a factor, and I'd like to find out, is the role of Newtown's Plan of Conservation and Development, or even the Fairfield Hills Plan of Conservation and Development. Do those types of plans play any role in promoting or discouraging local workforce or affordable housing development? Is there any connection to that or between the two?
They're supposed to play a role. The town planning or plan of development is a guideline to be used by zoning and by other policymakers in town. I think it does a pretty good job of laying out the need for more affordable housing and not only for workforce, for our parents, for our children who are just out of college trying to start a family so they can stay in town. That's got to be more affordable. It's not what we're really talking about diversity here, but it plays a part. So the plan of development is, as I said, a guideline. It's not binding. We're required to redo it every 10 years, and we do it. I think it's a pretty good document, pretty comprehensive. But it's almost like some books where you can find support for almost any position.
Mm-hmm. I get it.
It talks about not overburdening the infrastructure, so that says, well, not so dense. But it talks about more affordable housing, which is more dense. So it's never been a clear-cut issue,
Okay.
black and white, except under 830G.
Yeah. How about you, George? Any additional thoughts on POCD and its the relation to housing?
The POCD really, we have a whole section on housing and about diversity of housing, that we should increase our diversity. It's very explicit. The POCD, like Don said, is a guide we use. And we can use that as a backup for zoning amendments that we want to pass to increase the availability of affordable housing. So it is there as a document that we can reference and say, this is something we're striving for. So we have that as backup for arguments to increase or change our zoning regulations to allow more affordable housing. And that goes along with Fairfield Hills. Maybe Dan want to talk about this a little bit, but in the beginning, housing was allowed at Fairfield Hills. When the original zoning regulations were out, we had elderly housing, we had affordable housing, we had all sorts of housing allowed at Fairfield Hills. And that at some point was taken out of the zoning regulations. What we're looking for and have been looking for, I've been trying to do for probably the past 10 years, is to include some type of housing at Fairfield Hills. I don't know, Dan, if you want to talk a little bit about that more.
Yeah, because the timing is kind of incredible in that, we never planned the storm that caused this discussion to be postponed to today. But as we have this discussion, tomorrow night, the Legislative Council is going to be finalizing a question for this November's ballot that will, in effect, Dan, be a binding referenda on whether or not the consideration of housing might be included in the Fairfield Hills plan.
Well, it's not binding. It's all up, the final decision is up to the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Yeah, I think the community's voice on this will be binding in terms of how I think the decision makers, react to it. But yeah, we also, I guess, we certainly didn't plan the power outage that disrupted this meeting, but it was also the pandemic that pushed off a lot of the discussion that I had been having with the community on the subject of Fairfield Hills. So real quick, so as George said, about 5 years ago, Planning and Zoning revised the adaptive reuse zone for Fairfield Hills and took out the ability for there to be, for housing to be considered here as an option. And again, some of that goes back to, we purchased Fairfield Hills, or at least, I think the consensus around the purchase of Fairfield Hills was all the other competing proposals for this campus at the time that the town purchased the property, and that we moved forward on the purchase in 2001 and closed on the purchase in 2004, were, again, we were still in a housing boom, and all the other competing proposals for the campus were single family homes, level the campus and build, a number of single family homes. And I don't recall the number, but it was a lot.
Yeah, it was.
We're not, that is not being, proposed here. But again, I think there was, obviously a lot of consternation that was taken out 5 years ago. The Master Plan Review Committee that the Board of Selectmen had appointed in the summer of 2018, that then made their report to the Board of Selectmen in the summer of 2019, did open the door again. Frankly, it was always in their plan. It just wasn't in the zoning rules for the campus. They did propose that we consider mixed use, housing and some sort of commercial component in up to 2 buildings on the campus. There's also been surveys that have been conducted over the years. The survey that this Master Plan Review Committee had put out, this would have been the spring of last year. The answers came back kind of mixed. It was very solidly, admittedly against the idea of housing, to the tune of, and unfortunately with surveys, questions get asked in vacuums, but it was fairly solidly against any housing the tune of, call it, range, but, call it 70 to 75% or thereabouts.
Oh,
But but strangely, almost the same number of people said the town shouldn't spend any money up there. So it left us, trying to reconcile, what exactly do people want us to do here? And again, I want to be considerate of what people said. So we are moving forward with, and hopefully the legislative council will follow suit with placing a question on the ballot, basically taking the public's temperature. It'll be on the ballot in November, assuming the council moves forward, and the public will have a chance to weigh in on that. If the public should say yes, then presumably the selectmen would endorse. I can only speak for what I would do, but there are two other folks on the Board of Selectmen. Presumably the Board of Selectmen, though, would ratify the Master Plan Review Committee's recommendation and then send it to Planning and Zoning for Planning and Zoning to update the reuse zone for the campus. Again, I think that if the community says strongly that they're in favor of it, then that puts the wind at everybody's back to do that. That will open the door for applications to come in. We have had interest from developers in two of the larger buildings on campus to convert them into, again, a mix, again, not demo them, restore them into a mix of apartments over some sort of, commercial component. Housing, of course, would be the bulk of it. And we're talking in the neighborhood, in terms of what developers have said, of somewhere around 150 units across, two buildings.
Okay.
But again, that would be a mix. Most likely, because of the substantial cost of restoration, developers would seek affordable credits, affordable housing credits, in order to be able to complete the project. So there would be a component that was affordable. But again, back to my other point, we do add to our numerator and our denominator, because there would be some market rate units as well.
Mm-hmm. And the alternative is, if the public says no and that initiative does not move forward, then it turns to planning for demolition.
I would say for the larger buildings, yes. Would some buildings be preserved? Some of the smaller duplexes, yeah, there's probably some sort of commercial reuse for those. But the larger, take Shelton House, the one that's painted, the wings are painted white when you pull in, that's 100,000 square feet. There's not much, the market for 1930s classic mental health space is not robust. Kent is 200,000 square feet by the soccer field. So there are the options beyond that for some of these larger buildings are scant. So yes, I mean, they're deteriorating faster than we could find another reuse for them.
Okay. Let's move on to a couple of the questions that were posed by folks over the course of us marketing these diversity discussions. And Kimberly, I'd like to bring your voice back into the conversation as well, not putting anybody on the spot, but it does give an opportunity to really, promote what you all feel in your heart are some of the best aspects of Newtown. A question was simply put: why should minorities choose Newtown as their hometown? How would you respond, in cocktail conversation if that question was put to you? And I'll start with you, Dan.
Look, I think that Newtown, Newtown is a community that has shown itself time and time again through many, trying times, to be a community that I think, is very driven by volunteerism, driven by people that care about one another. Should we always, examine ourselves and say, are we being as welcoming as we can? Absolutely. And I think that that's part of, the events of this past June, I think have us all sort of re-examining our hearts and souls and saying, are we doing everything we can to be a welcoming community to everyone? I think there are so many ways for people to get involved in this community. I think we have a wonderful education system, great public safety. I mean, there are many metrics that make Newtown a great community. Do I wish that it were more diverse? Absolutely. I mean, I think that adds to the richness of the community. am I, again, still, based on everything that's transpired over the last, several months, that's something we have to look long and hard at, is how can we be more welcoming to everybody? And I think that that will take all of us. But I do think it's a terrific community that anyone, no matter the color of their skin, their religion, um, should embrace it the way that I found the community has embraced me. So that's certainly something I want to strive for and work harder to attain.
Great. How about you, Don Mitchell? What do you think? Why should minorities choose Newtown as their hometown?
Well, right now, they would, I expect, choose it for the same reasons we all chose it. It's just, one, it's not very affordable. And two, you don't have already the diverse community. Newtown is a pretty welcoming town. Anybody who moves here, I can't imagine, any overt discrimination. But there's not if we get a non-white component, say, a significant component, there's I don't want to call it a sub-community, but it's like a religious minority.
Mm-hmm.
They have a religious life of their own, in conjunction with the life of the community. The Irish did it. They still do it to some extent. But without some kind of earthen factor here, that they would find welcoming, it's the chicken and egg thing.
Yep. Very good. Kimberly, what do you think? What would you tell people if you were saying come to Newtown?
I feel like Newtown is such a kind-hearted community. We see that time after time. If someone's in need somewhere, we have at least 6 groups of people jumping in to see what they can do to help. So I feel like we are a very welcoming community. I didn't grow up here, but I moved here when I was 18 and I never left. I do love it here. And there's just, Crystal and I find time after time when a business comes to town and we say to them, why did you pick Newtown? We always hear, I don't know, I just like it. And I couldn't tell you how many times we've heard that over and over again. So I don't know how to pinpoint what that is, but it's just, I think we're kind people, we're welcoming. And I've had an opportunity throughout my career to work with people from different ethnic backgrounds, religions. I've made a lot of great friends. So I hope that we do get a more diverse community. It's going to make us a better community.
How about you, George? Good opportunity for folks, no matter who they are, right?
Yeah, I've always found it very, as Kim said, a very welcoming community, very open community. We have different religions in town. We open up. I think it comes down to affordable housing. I don't see any reason why we wouldn't have more diversity in town. And that's not the only thing. I don't know if we have the area, the jobs, and other issues that we really need. And transportation comes into it too. We need more, I think, bus service and hopefully at some point way down the line, train service or something for people that open up a little bit. I don't see any overt reason why people would not want to move into Newtown. Let me put it that way.
There's some location disadvantages that would really impact everyone, not just the community.
Everybody on different economic scales.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, that being said, Dan, another question is there a municipal plan to represent and demonstrate diversity as a valued community goal? And I know that's something that I've heard on the agenda so far of a couple of selectmen meetings and some planning toward that. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that, the one thing that I neglected to say a few moments ago is I think that the best way to figure out how to make your community more welcoming and more inclusive is a lot of outreach with the folks that are already living here to try to understand what their experiences have been and to try to build on that, right? I mean, that can tell you, I think, a lot. And certainly, I've been trying to do that, and I've spoke, and look, guilty as charged. I think we're all we can't just make the assumption that, Newtown's welcoming. I mean, I may think it is, but it matters a lot to hear how welcoming it is from folks that are in the minority population in our community, rather than just assuming, hey, it's great for everybody. I have spoken to the Board of Selectmen, and I'm still working on, I would like to create sort of a diversity and inclusion, committee, appointed by the Board of Selectmen to look at, a number of things, but, really to try to serve as a form of outreach to folks in the community to get an understanding of, why did they move here? What is it about the community, that drew them here? And how has the community received them? And has it been welcoming? I mean, I can say, well, I think that there's no overt, racism here, and that may be just a gut statement. It matters more what they say about it.
Sure.
And that's what I think we need to do, is sort of, open our ears and get an understanding of the experiences that people are having here. I think that without doing that, and without accomplishing that, it doesn't really matter much, what we say about the community. It really does matter what the experience is for everyone living here.
Very good.
I think it goes back to what we talked about before too, is that people don't realize we do have diversity in housing. And people think about Newtown, think about, well, I can't move there. I can't afford to move to Newtown. I think that's a perception people have about Newtown, as being everybody has the big home and everything and the big yard, and there's no diversity in housing, but we do have it. I think that's something that people just don't, I think people don't even think about the possibility of moving into Newtown because of that. I think it's just a perception of towns like Newtown, that people think that they're just rich suburbs with nobody else living there but rich people.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, as we draw to a close, I just wanted to give any of you an opportunity to speak to any other rumors or misconceptions that you're hearing about how Newtown deals with proposed housing expansion and inclusion, specifically in regards to housing. And it lacking that, how can concerned residents play more of a role in advocating for zoning reforms that could enhance the availability of workforce or affordable housing?
So, one thing that, is part of state statute, in terms of how people can get involved. I mean, there's certainly, one way that comes to mind immediately is we're going to be working on an affordable housing plan that we have to prepare as part of state statute. So we just secured a grant actually for some technical services around that. But presumably there'll be public hearings and opportunity for public input around that process. Correct, George?
Yes, we just received a grant from the state to do a plan that's actually part of the 830G statute. So there are good things about it. We have to redo that every 5 years. But again, it's something that we have to plan out and try to determine if we can do more to open up the affordable housing opportunities in town. But yeah, it's a long-term plan, and we've been working on it. And a lot of people have asked me, even recently, what have we done? And we've really done a lot in Newtown. We have, over the years. We've really tried to be inclusive. We changed zoning regulations. Other towns are fighting back, trying to get a moratorium, trying to stop it. We're trying to figure out a way to do it that will work well for Newtown and for the people that want to move into Newtown. And I think we're doing a very good job in Newtown, and we've actually been invited to talk to other towns about how we've done it and how we've improved. We have ways to go, but we have made really good steps for a town, for Newtown, I think, in the last 10 or 15 years. I think we've come a long way.
Do you think, Don, more, would you like to see more people vying for elected office on either the Planning and Zoning or the Planning and Zoning Board of Appeals or any other local boards or commissions that deal with specifically housing?
Absolutely. We need new blood all the time, new ideas. We're not the only ones with ideas. Very often, someone from just sitting in on our hearing or a meeting will have an idea that resonates, and we picked up on it and run with it. That kind of input is invaluable. We're not the smart people in the room.
Yeah. And I don't cover a lot of planning and zoning meetings, but I know sometimes the material can be dry, but it could probably serve a lot of people well who may either not know the business of the planning and zoning initiatives in town, or who think they know, to even just attend a meeting and see what it's all about and get a feel for the people who are sort of those gatekeepers on that commission.
And very often you sit in those meetings and you see something coming early on. And so, you can study up on it and have your input, have your say. And if you don't have your say, it's tough to complain.
Very good. And speaking of complaints, last call for anyone, anything that you've seen on social network, any statements that you've seen or rumors or concerns that we haven't really addressed in the greater discussion today, specifically about Newtown or its user friendliness in terms of housing and inclusion, that we want to address before we say farewell for this evening?
Housing costs are a constant complaint from people who already live here. So you can imagine.
And taxes.
Yeah, yes. And you can imagine that's double or triple for somebody thinking about coming here. But it's tough to cut those taxes as a way to entice people without cutting the value, the fabric that's been created in Newtown.
Yeah, and the services that people love about Newtown, and it is in many ways a much greater problem than somebody could address through a social network post. But I thank you all for your input and great information, a ton of stuff that we covered today. First Selectman Dan Rosenthal with us, Fair Housing Officer Kimberly Chiapetta, who also assists the Economic and Community Development Office in Fairfield Hills Authority, Don Mitchell, Attorney and Planning and Zoning Chairman, and Land Use Director George Benson, who, as we said at the beginning, also serves on the Home CT Steering Committee of the Partnership for Strong Communities, which is engaged in affordable housing challenges and initiatives. A great voice with a lot of experience as Newtown moves toward initiatives to both create affordable housing plan and an inclusionary committee. So it really does sound like Newtown is in a much better position and in a much more unique position than a lot of people may quickly give us credit for on social networks or over the back fence. So thank you so much for letting me editorialize for a moment, and thank you all for participating today. And we'll be looking toward our next segment of diversity discussions here for the Newtown Bee. I'm John Boquette, Newtown Bee's Associate Editor, and we'll see you for our next diversity discussion. Thank you all for participating.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, John.
Take care.